reduction was achieved through dumping of futures contracts on the COMEX exchange. Notice that these takedowns in the gold price typically happen during New York trading hours, and the COMEX tends to be one of the preferred venues to achieve such things. And when you see the equivalent of, say, 1,000 metric tons of gold in paper form in futures contracts being dumped on the market in a very, 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 very short period of time, in a matter of maybe hours or over even at most a 24-hour period, that's literally like taking a bazooka to kill a mosquito. I mean, it overwhelms the system. It overwhelms the what we know as the price discovery mechanism for gold, because the gold price, as it's presented to us on screens and through TVs, doesn't know the difference between a physical ounce and a paper ounce or a futures ounce of gold. And so this way and when we talk about, also, just to be completely clear here, when we talk about 1,000 metric tons of paper contract gold being sold in this extremely short period of time, bear in mind that the world mine production for a year is somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 metric tons. So when you have futures contracts representing a third of global output being dumped on the market at once, it overwhelms the system. The price discovery mechanism, which I would argue is not even price discovery, and it also shows very clearly that the people doing the selling, or the entity doing the selling, is not trying to get the best price for their product. It has all the earmarks of being, as opposed to trying to maximize the price for the good that they're selling, it's like they're trying to achieve a breakdown in the pricing mechanism. And when you think about, if you want to just think in terms of economics 101, for anybody who maybe studied economics, because a lot of people have at some point in their academic lives, we're taught that the basic tenets of supply and demand is that, people are always trying to achieve the best price they can for their output or for the goods that they're selling. And what we see repeatedly in the precious metals market is, activity that would suggest exactly the opposite. It's sort of like, it's being telegraphed that they're trying to get the least possible they can for what they're selling. And that's what identifies this activity as being fraudulent and being politically motivated, as opposed, if it's not profit motivated, it's got to be politically motivated. Anyway, I hope that serves as somewhat of an explanation.
From your contacts, when prices are brought down, by $50, by $100 per ounce, do you see central banks or countries or investors just gobbling up the gold?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, you see, when the price is attacked like this, it isn't really because people have liquidated physical positions. These price takedowns are achieved by selling imaginary, yet to be mined, or gold that does not exist. And it's just that the price discovery mechanism can't tell the difference between a physical ounce and a paper ounce. But I mean, what we see every time there is a takedown, Dave, is like, for people in America and up here in Canada too, typically we see record sales volumes on gold eagles, silver eagles, in Canada, gold maples, silver maples. And every time they smash the price, these things become, let's just say, less available. And it causes a a lineup of people saying, I would love to have some at the new reduced price. And what it typically does is it creates waiting time. Often when the prices are attacked the way they have been recently, the wait times for getting metal tend to get lengthened. So as opposed to being able to go to a dealer in precious metal and do cash and carry for a big box of coins, you might have to pay today and get them in 2 or 3 weeks when demand surges. And typically the demand surges when we have these price breakdowns.
Rob, I wanted to transition over to what is happening in Europe with Deutsche Bank, the Italian banks. Right now, I mean, we see what is happening where Deutsche Bank is in trouble. Do you think the central bankers are right now, are they in crisis mode?
I believe they are, but I would suggest this with regard to Deutsche Bank.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between Deutsche Bank and, say, JP Morgan Chase is, in my view, who they report to. Deutsche Bank reports to the ultimate reporting authority in Germany is an organization called BaFin, and BaFin is extremely independent, vigorously so, and these people enforce probity in their banking system. That's the mission that they're charged with, to make sure there's no hokey pokey going on. The American banking, systemically dangerous institutions like the Morgans, the Citis, the B of A's, the Goldmans, and the Morgan Stanleys. These are institutions that ultimately report to the Federal Reserve, and these are the institutions that are chosen to let's just say enforce or perpetuate the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. So the activities that these banks like JP Morgan are engaged in underpin the perpetuation of the dollar as the global reserve currency and unit of trade. Like all commodities in the world basically trade in US dollars. Oil trades in US dollars, the lumber trades in US dollars, grain trades in US dollars, and we live in a US dollar centric system, or have up until very recently, when a lot of bilateral trade agreements have been struck between the Chinese, the Indians, the Russians, the Brazilians, where they are making arrangements and are building facilities where they can transact directly in their currencies as opposed to the dollar. And in a world where foreign central banks hold trillions of dollars in their reserve accounts, this becomes problematic when countries that have reserves are suddenly not doing business in dollars, because what it does is it undermines the rationale or the reason for them to actually hold dollars. And when they sell their dollars, or if they sell their dollars, the dollars return home. And that can be and will become a very, very inflationary in nature, and likely will cause problems in the future, probably causing more problems than anyone cares to admit right now. But anyway, the big difference between Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan is who they report to. And when BaFin raided Deutsche Bank's offices a number of years back, it's been alluded to me by people who are close to German leadership that they were horrified with what they found. And I would suggest to you what they found was that Deutsche Bank was basically engaged in activities that were largely geared towards the perpetuation of the US dollar as the global reserve currency. That would be inconsistent with BaFin's mandate because BaFin would not view Deutsche Bank's raison d'etre to be the perpetuation of the U.S. dollar, and this would have deeply upset them, and this is why Deutsche Bank was given new marching orders. But so, and just to bring this full circle, because I'm comparing Deutsche Bank to J.P. Morgan and saying that the difference is who they report to. If Deutsche Bank is truly as financially sick as pundits claim, because much of this argument that they're in trouble rests on the size and on the makeup of their derivatives book. J.P. Morgan's derivatives book is probably much bigger than Deutsche Bank's, because Deutsche Bank has been trimming theirs back dramatically over the last 2 years. And J.P. Morgan's derivatives are exactly the same composition of whatever Deutsche Bank had on their books or off their books, because the derivatives contracts that these institutions hold in many trillions of size or notional, these are off-balance sheet items. So if Deutsche Bank is sick from their derivatives book, by extension, it means that Morgan is sick, Citi is sick, B of A is sick, and Goldman is sick, and so is Morgan Stanley, because they all have the same stuff in their derivatives books.
Realistically, the stress tests that the central bank performs on these banks, to me,
they're a farce.
Yeah, I was going to say it's more propaganda.
Farce. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're as believable as U.S. media coverage of the election.
Do you think they'll let Deutsche Bank collapse if it's that bad off, or do you think the German government will bail them out, or do you think they will bail in, or do you think maybe they'll find an investor to fund the bank for a little while longer?
Well, the way I view it is that if the globalists have determined that the financial system or the financial edifice is not robust enough to continue in its current form, they may very well initiate a collapse of Deutsche Bank, and this way they can blame the Germans. And that is sort of a recurring thing with the globalists. I mean, the Second World War was blamed on the Germans. The First World War was blamed on the Germans, which brought on the reparations, which set the stage for the Second World War. And now here we are, we've got a German bank being effectively demonized in the Western press. And I would say the reality of what's occurring with Deutsche Bank is they're being brought to heel by regulators actually acting in a responsible fashion. You see, and the reason this doesn't happen to the American banks is that the Federal Reserve views the American banks as the muscle to perpetuate the dollar. So their worldview is much different than German regulators. And would they use a Deutsche Bank? There was a saying by a famous American politician, someone very close to the presidency, who said they never like to let a good crisis go to waste, or a good calamity go to waste. So the globalists are very, very ruthless in using these calamities as to achieve greater and bigger things. So would I put it past them to collapse Deutsche Bank, as a scapegoat, and to try and hopefully, create a pile of ashes that they can, then resurrect something new, more to their liking from the carnage. Quite possible. But I mean, if Deutsche Bank is sick and bad, you know that there's a host of others that are in the same boat.
If they do allow Deutsche Bank to crash, what effect does it have on other banks and U.S. banks, Canadian banks, Australian banks, UK banks? What would happen?
My view is we'd have a systemic. To me, these banks are all lined up like dominoes. And if one of these big systemically important banks goes down, I believe it brings down a whole pile of them. But at the end of the day, my worldview is that we are approaching a time where we're going to get a global reset in our financial system anyway, and they may just use this as the trigger to initiate such a thing.
Now, you did mention the elections, and they're coming up this November, and of course we have Hillary Clinton and Trump. We talked a little bit about this before we started to broadcast the interview. But from your perspective, do you think the elite, if the elections aren't going in the direction they want, do you think they'll allow the elections to happen and they will allow, let's say, Trump to move into the office of the presidency? Or do you think they have something else up their sleeves?
To begin with, I put nothing past the globalist entity. The election in America, in a nutshell, to me, is a referendum on globalism, whether Americans are going to stand, for being run by globalists, or whether America is going to stand for, its own nationalist self-interest. To me, that's what the election boils down to, with Hillary Clinton being the globalist candidate and Trump being the patriot and the nationalist candidate, and that's leaving their policies and their and the sex crap behind. It boils down to globalism versus nationalism. The globalists are ruthlessly eugenics oriented, and have stated over the past 4 or 5 decades their desire to have the global population reduced dramatically. They are anti-human, and for that reason, I side with the nationalist candidate, and I don't know how good a president he'd be at all, but I'll take nationalism over globalism any day. So whether or not the globalists will allow Trump to actually ascend to the presidency should he win, let's just say there's a growing sentiment amongst people that I talk to who are engaged in commentating on financial issues, geopolitical issues. I would say there's a growing consensus that the globalists will likely, we say, flip the tables over before there would be allowed to be an election result where Trump would win. So I think we're in for a very, very, very interesting, possibly diabolically interesting next 3 weeks in the run-up to the actual election day in America. Personally, I think there's very good chance we might see something happen that would allow the Democratic President Obama to possibly suspend or cancel the election. And whether that would be initiated through the starting of a war, a hot war with Russia, or whether that could involve an assassination of a political candidate. These are things that I think are all on the menu by the globalists, because these people they're lecherous. They are lecherous, dangerous people, and they are probably the worst threat humanity has ever experienced in recorded history. And these people will stop at nothing to achieve their means, and they are very, very dangerous. And I put nothing past them at all. So I think we're in for an extremely interesting next 3 weeks. It's an amazing time to be alive with what is going on in our space.
It really feels like we have a perfect storm heading our way. I mean, we have the elections coming up. We have the economy deteriorating, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. All the private Western Central Bank countries, they're deteriorating very, very quickly. We have DHS making sure that nothing happens to the election system. And then we have word that Obama is going to instruct the CIA to pick out targets in Russia to cyber attack. from your viewpoint, where do you think we are headed with that? If there is some type of cyber attack where the United States attacks Russia, what do you think
Well,
Russia's next move would be?
my belief to begin with is that um, polls that are being polls that are being announced or that are being reported in the mainstream or dinosaur press in America have been severely skewed in a manner. To give an example, if if a poll is being conducted where they, let's just say, if there's a CNN poll where they're going to call 1,000 people to get their opinions on who's going to win the election, what's been occurring, and it's been documented, that they would, for instance, phone 600 known Democrat supporters to 400, let's just say, random people who may be Republican, Democrat, or other. And then on the basis of them doing that 1,000 person poll or sample, they'll make a pronouncement that, Hillary's ahead by 10 points. Well, if you phone known Democrats to get your poll results, you're going to have a Democrat in the lead of any such poll. This is what's being done, and it's a travesty. It's purposeful disinformation on the part of all the mainstream outlets in America, who are completely in the tank for the Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton, and it's completely the opposite to what the fiduciary duty of a supposed free press. Supposed free press is charged with in a democratic society, is charged with doing honest investigative journalism and reporting real news. But what we're being fed is so ridiculously biased, and they're so clearly in the tank for the Democrats that that's a complete and utter joke. So, we're not being fed good information. The reason for this is the media is completely owned by the globalists, and I mean that is literally the result of four or five major corporations owning the media, and the concentration of media in such few hands. It becomes a very easy job for globalist-minded entities to, have their way with them, through bribes, threats, or otherwise. And this is what we're seeing, and it's very, very sad and quite disturbing to see this. And whether these people are going to ever allow Trump to win the day, I don't see it happening. If I was a globalist, I would do whatever was required to make sure that result didn't happen. And I think what we're likely to see in the next 3 weeks will be earth shaking and earth moving, and likely alters the course of humanity in a very, very substantial way.
Are you talking about war?
Yes, I'm talking about war. I'm talking about quite possibly the suspension of the Constitution in America, martial law, or maybe a big nuclear war that makes all of this moot.
Now, why would they do this? Why would they push war? I mean, they know if we move towards war and we actually have war and we end up with nuclear war, they know that, people are going to die. And, there's going to be a lot of damage. There's going to be people starving to death. It's not going to be a good situation for anybody. Why would they want war?
To begin with, globalists are very, very, very sick sociopaths, and they're like I said earlier, their goal is to have dramatic population reduction on the planet. And these globalists are literally so sick that they believe a nuclear war is winnable. And you see, because they have their bunkers, and they feel that they can have a nuclear war and win somehow, and emerge from their bunkers after they've irradiated the world, and emerge and declare victory. And this is literally how sick these individuals are. And when you think about it, Dave, mm-hmm. when you look at who the horse that they're running in this race for the presidency, they're effectively, I like to refer to it as, Hillary is clearly a very, very sick, ill person. She is not with it. Whether she has whatever kind of neurological shortcoming she has. I've watched the video of her doing a face plant. Like she literally can't. I mean, Dave, who takes 20 days off, 28 days before a national election in America? I mean, after the last debate, her campaign said that she's going to be basically in hiding for the next 20 days. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's without precedent. It's never occurred before. And I mean, she has one foot in the glue factory already. This is a person who is not well. I mean, just for her, from the standpoint of her own health, why are they running this person? This person is not fit to take office, and just physically isn't up to the challenge. And anyway, it's beyond rational thought why this is occurring, other than, you're dealing with a very, very big pile of sick puppies. And I don't know what else to say. It's shameful. It's beyond shameful.
Do you think everything that they're doing right now is to cover up everything the governments, the central banks have been doing for the last 50, 60, 100 years? Because like you said earlier, the dollar is at its end. The dollar will be coming back to the United States. The petrodollar system in the Middle East is completely just at its end game right now. And what we're seeing is that everything is just starting to deteriorate, crumble, and it looks like the only alternative they have to cover up everything that they've done is to have war. And especially if they don't get their candidate into the White House, they're like pretty much done. And
well, I mean, it was the last debate where Trump basically gave Hillary, the walking directions of what's going to occur if and when he becomes president. He said, you're going to be investigated and you're going to jail. So, like, Hillary's all in because she has to be. So from a Hillary, from a very sick individual's perspective, she's done no matter what happens. Like, she's done if they have, or you can say humanity's done if we have a war, but she doesn't care because she's done if she loses. So when people are in a position, especially people who are in positions of extreme power, and they're confronted with a no-win situation, they might behave in a way that wouldn't be very responsible. And that's, we're seeing the groundwork being laid for these people to conduct and act in very irresponsible ways. And, hopefully the good people in the U.S. military won't allow these sick individuals to, bring about the undoing of mankind.
From everything that you've been looking at, what would you give the time frame of when all of this would happen, when the economy would completely collapse, war would happen? Where, in what time frame do you think that all this is going to happen?
I mean, I would expect we could see some absolutely crazy things prior to the election. And if there's an election, some absolutely crazy things could follow from it. So, let's just say the next month or month and a half or 2 months is going to be a very, very, very interesting period of time to be alive. And hopefully we remain alive.
I hope so, yes. Hey, Rob, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
You can find me on the web at kirbyanalytics.com.
Rob, once again, thank you very much for being on the Spotlight. I appreciate it.
Pleasure being with you.